Welcome back to the Barbell Medicine Podcast. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum. Today, we're sharing a clip from a recent exclusive Ask Us Anything that Dr. Baraki and I did for the Barbell Medicine Plus subscribers. And we're tackling one of the most frustrating and frankly misunderstood parts of training, the training plateau. Now, before we get into today's episode, I want to run through a little thought experiment with you. This is a very common scenario we see play out almost every single day, and how you answer this says everything about how you understand progression, plateaus in training, and what to do about it. So for background information, you need to be familiar with the fitness fatigue model, which is used to describe how people adapt and respond to exercise. In this model, performing exercise drives a simultaneous increase in both fitness and fatigue levels. Now, there are many exercise variables that can be adjusted to try to generate more fitness and less fatigue, but there are no free lunches here. More exercise will tend to drive more fitness and more fatigue, whereas less exercise will tend to drive less fitness and less fatigue. All right, with that in mind, let's imagine a lifter who squats 310 pounds for 3 sets of 6 repetitions at an RPE 8, so 2 reps left in the tank on week 1. He comes back on week 2 and he squats 315 pounds for 3 sets of 6 reps, but this time it was a soul-crushing, bone-on-bone RPE 10 for each set. It was maximal, no reps left in the tank. First question is, which day was he stronger? Got your answer yet? Most people will look at the number on the bar and say, he was stronger on week 2. 315 pounds is more than 310 pounds, right? So he's stronger when he squatted more weight. But the fact that the effort was much harder on week 2 should influence your interpretation. On week 1, he did each set with 2 reps left in the tank, meaning he could have definitely squatted 315 pounds if he wanted to. Sure, it might have been a little harder, but it's unlikely that adding a measly 5 pounds would have made it a 10 out of 10 maximal effort like he experienced on week 2. If we compare the 2 efforts, his performance was either roughly the same or lower on week 2 as it was compared to week 1. If he had actually gotten stronger, he should have been able to lift more weight with the same relative effort, meaning that he should have been able to squat 315 pounds for 3 sets of 6, all at RPE 8, or 2 reps left in the tank. But since he didn't actually get stronger in the time between the workouts, perhaps maybe even getting weaker, some folks might interpret this as a stall or a training plateau. But why? Was it a lack of fitness adaptations, in this case strength, coming online, or was it too much fatigue to where the lifter couldn't recover before the next session? Now, if we think it's a lack of fitness, we need to increase the signal from the exercise program to drive more strength development. We might need more volume, more intensity, or more something to get the wheels turning. In the short term, this is unlikely to immediately produce results, as the added training will also drive additional fatigue and the body needs some time to adapt or accommodate to it. If we think it's a lack of recovery, adding more work is like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. In that case, we need to pull back and reduce the signal from the exercise program. In the short term, this might work to see an increase in strength, as reducing the amount of training being done can temporarily increase performance as fatigue is dissipated or bled off. This is how most peaking programs work. But if we reduce the exercise over the long term, however, we are getting less of a signal to improve fitness too. In this particular scenario, we don't really know why the lifter didn't get stronger because there's just not enough information. It's only been a week and that just doesn't tell us much. Now, if that was your answer, congratulations, you win. But many people react to a 1-week stall by panicking. They see the bar speed slow down or the weight stay the same, and they immediately want to change their program. They're responding to short-term noise, and in doing so, they often destroy the long-term signal. Adaptations require the consistent application of an appropriately dosed stimulus over a long period of time. You can't rush it, and you certainly can't get more out of doing less than you actually need long-term. So we decided to stop the guessing game. Today, we're dropping a brand new 6-part audio series on Barbell Medicine Plus called the Training Plateau Action Plan, and it comes with an actionable PDF to help you determine exactly why you stalled and, most importantly, what to do about it. To give you a taste of how we think through these problems, I'm sharing a clip from our recent Ask Us Anything that, again, I did with Dr. Baraki for our Barbell Medicine Plus subscribers. We start by defining what a plateau or a stall is, as well as some strategies for determining the cause and how to move forward to get over the hump. Here's that conversation. So the question is, if any of your lifts stall for more than 3 to 4 weeks, or you hit peak performance for a certain rep range and your performance drops, will you increase volume for the next block or try to adjust variables like exercise selection for the same block and or rep ranges? And also, is there a time where powerlifters will benefit from an extended hypertrophy block to break through a plateau instead of doing a powerlifting specific block? Pretty interesting question. We've talked about this a number of times in different places. Should we do a dedicated podcast on this? You guys can comment and let us know, like powerlifting performance, what do for programming? I don't know. Maybe that's interesting to some people, or maybe it's just a dwindling cohort of our audience. We'll see. But tell me what you think about this, Dr. Baraki. When I think about a stall, I want to define it, or a plateau. And I think about it as a lack of progress for about 3 to 4 weeks, despite consistent effort and being in a resource-rich environment, meaning that the person is eating reasonably well, sleeping reasonably well. There's not this crazy life stress or environmental stress that's going on. So we would predict that if the program was appropriate as far as the formulation, so what's in it, and the correct dose, that you would see some demonstrable progress in that time frame. And in particular, I'm thinking about the priority lifts. So the exercises that come first, second, or even third on our templates. Whereas if there's biceps curls at the end, I'm I don't know that I care that much. And I don't know that I can quantify that as a stall. It's just look, it's at the end of the session. So fatigue is just going to be a thing. Does that jive with your kind of, how you would define a stall or a plateau?
I think it's reasonable. The only thing that I don't know if it's really a quibble or just a slightly different way to think about it, is when you put a time frame, that 3 to 4 week period, that is admittedly made up, just to be clear, and also something that may require a little bit of adjustment based on the person that we're talking about and where they're at in their training journey. And the reason I say that is for you or I, when we're training seriously, it's if our lifts aren't really moving a ton over the course of 3 to 4 weeks, we are not suddenly freaking out or saying, oh, we're in a stall and aggressively changing tons of variables. There might be some tinkering that we're doing, but at the same time, it's I've mentioned this before. If either of us hit a PR once or twice a year, that's a pretty good year for us at this point, right? And so it's how much true quote unquote progress can you realistically expect outside of kind of artifactual progress? And when I say artifactual progress, that means if you set up your training in a way that the loads necessarily go up week to week, maybe because your RPE targets are getting higher or because your rep range is going down. That's not necessarily the same thing as progress. It's just a different way to set up your training, perhaps to give you a lead in, to build some physical adaptations, to get your psychology right, to kind of build some momentum in various ways. And so, yeah, if we have, this a person who, as I gather, is likely the case from the person asking this question, maybe a early intermediate, quote unquote, if we wanted to apply that kind of also made up terminology, then yeah, that's a reasonable amount of time during which we should see some demonstrable, changes in their performance. But for a very early career lifter, maybe we expect some things a little bit more often. For a much later career lifter, we might not expect things anywhere near that time frame. So that's the only quibble I would have here. But otherwise, yeah, pretty reasonable take.
Yeah, it's not. I think you could maybe adjust that time frame 2 different ways. So way number 1 would be look, if you are anybody up to a very experienced or relatively experienced trainee, within 3 to 4 weeks, you should see some demonstrable progress if everything else has stayed the same and the environment is resource rich, like we said. And if you are an advanced lifter, it's probably going to be longer. So that's one adjustment. Alternatively, you could adjust the anchor by which you're comparing performance. So for example, your best squat all time is 630 or something, or 620.
Yeah, right around there. Yep, 625, I think. Mm-hmm.
But that's not your current max.
Totally not.
Your current max, let's call it 540 or something, sure, whatever it is, right? And so even then, with your current max, I would expect some sort of signal of an improvement within that, it's 3 to 4 weeks, maybe it's 5 weeks, whatever, from where you're starting, to that time point. So I think that historical anchor can be problematic if you're trying to define a stall or plateau. I would use a more recent benchmark.
That's fair. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. All right. So the first part when I'm thinking through this is let's verify. Let's do an assessment. Let's verify. Are we tracking estimated 1RM? Are we testing actual 1RM? We tend to favor the former, right? Because testing in training, it's is it really important that we get the most accurate, look, you went up and then you went to a point where you failed. I don't think that's necessary, but the problem becomes when people are tracking estimated 1RMs from sets of 8 or 10 or 12, or the rep ranges are moving. It's like, I don't know that this really, like, it's not giving me a strong enough signal of like, yep, you're stalled for sure. It's more like, this is just noisy data. And so at that point, I might say, why don't you do a single at 8, before or after, and just as a comparison. And so one strategy that I use, and you'll see it in our templates and in my coaching clients, is like week 1. This is just an example. The numbers are kind of made up, depends on the person, but they'll do a squat, 4 at 7, 4 at 8, 4 at 9, or 4 at 6, 4 at 7, 4 at 8, these ascending sets to triangulate their current strength potential. And then at the end of the block, let's call it 8 weeks later, they'll do 4 at 7, 4 at 8, 4 at 9. It's it's like a test type thing just to compare and say, did you get stronger or not? And that kind of gives me feedback that I feel like is relatively, you could compare it without doing too much, rationalization or too much hand wavy, mental gymnastics sort of stuff. So that's the first thing I want to verify. Part 2 is, and this is like, I don't know what the market size is for like strength training as far as money goes, but let's call it the $1 million question. You have to determine whether or not it's insufficient stimulus, right? Or insufficient sort of adaptation. Like, is it too much or too little, basically? And that is challenging to discern. Between moving into a new house, managing the business, and keeping up with my own training, my schedule is pretty much a disaster right now. For me, I realized that cooking healthy meals just wasn't going to happen when I found myself finishing a long day and realizing I still had an hour of prep and cleanup ahead of me. Look, you want to eat better, and when you have zero time and energy, Factor solves the problem. 2 minutes, real food, and you're done. It's not that you're failing at healthy eating, you're just failing at having extra hours in the day. Factor makes it super easy. All of their meals are made by chefs and designed by dietitians, and then they're delivered right to your door. We're talking about lean proteins, colorful vegetables, and healthy fats with no added sugars. I've been leaning on the Muscle Pro collection as it fits my needs as someone doing a lot of training. They also have high protein options, vegetarian options, and a ton of other different dietary patterns too. Any way you slice it, all of their meals are fresh, never frozen, and the food is ready in minutes. It's super easy to stay on track with Factor. Head over to factormeals.com/BBM50 off and use code BBM50 off to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for an entire year. The offer is only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. Make healthier eating easier with Factor. That's factormeals.com/BBM50 off. This podcast is brought to you by Figs. At Barbell Medicine, we spend a lot of time talking about what it takes to build a body that can handle high-level performance, but the recovery and health side is just as critical. Now, over the last 6 years, an incredible team of healthcare professionals did something that most people thought was impossible. They helped rebuild the body of legendary Olympian Lindsey Vonn after a series of devastating injuries. And now, she's actually headed back to the 2026 Winter Games in Milan, and she's ready to break records once again. This February, Lindsey's team and the entire USA medical team will be wearing Figs, and you can rock their official uniform too. The new Team USA collection from Figs is engineered with Fiber X. It's their most durable fabric yet. It really is setting a new gold standard for high-level performance scrub wear because it's lightweight, it's breathable, and it's ultra-resilient for those long shifts. And of course, the style comes in red, white, and blue. Now, if you want the gear that the medical team behind the world's best athletes are wearing, check out the limited edition Team USA collection. You get 15% off your first order at wearfigs.com with code FIGSRX. That's wearfigs.com, code FIGSRX. We talk a lot about efficiency and high-yield results in training, and your wardrobe should follow the same logic. A well-built wardrobe is about pieces that work together and hold up over time, and that's what Quince does best. Premium materials, thoughtful design, and everyday staples that feel easy to wear and easy to rely on, even as the weather changes. Quince has everyday essentials I love with quality that lasts. From organic cotton sweaters and polos for every occasion to lighter jackets for the changing seasons. The secret is that they work directly with top factories and cut out the middlemen, so you're not paying for a massive brand markup. You're just getting quality clothing, and everything is built to hold up to daily wear and still look good season after season. Plus, they only partner with factories that meet rigorous standards for craftsmanship and ethical production. We've recently had some cooler weather in Southern California, so I've been rotating through a few of their cashmere sweaters and their jackets if I'm going somewhere else besides the gym. They look great, and they've been holding up way better than others I bought that cost way more. So for me, it's a no-brainer. Refresh your wardrobe with Quince. Go to quince.com/BBM for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/BBM. Free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/BBM. So, if you're not getting enough stress to drive an adaptation, you won't see the fitness adaptation, provided you're measuring it in some sort of way that is repeatable. And if you're not able to recover or respond to it, like excessive fatigue, you're doing too much, you're also not going to be able to demonstrate that improvement in fitness adaptation. So discerning that, like teasing that out, is challenging. When I think about it, I'm like, if it's insufficient, person's probably not sore very often. They feel pretty fresh on a daily basis when they go into the gym. It's just kind of stagnant, the weights that they're using, for example. On the other hand, with excessive fatigue, too much, I'm like, you're probably sore more often than not. You might have some joint, pain type stuff that's kind of popping up. Your motivation might be a little compromised because every session's kind of a grinder. Your session RPEs are higher, like stuff like that. Does that seem to make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's often how we have these conversations with people when they have these concerns, trying to get a much more of a subjective history on how they're feeling day to day, how they're approaching their workouts, how they're leaving their workouts, to kind of give us a little bit of direction of, am I pushing further or am I pulling back? And then am I keeping things kind of more steady, giving it more time sometimes is the right answer. So there's a lot of different paths, but some of that subjective input from the trainee is really essential. It's not something that is always very clearly quantifiable that will point you in a confident direction. The athlete's input is really important.
Yeah, you got to you're just hedging your bets. You're like, I feel like it's probably too little, or I feel like it's probably too much. And those have, different sort of courses of action. If you feel like it's not enough, then you're going to need more training load. And if you feel like it's too much, you need less training load. And so once you've kind of chosen your path, two paths diverge into the woods, and I chose the one less, whatever. You got to pick a path, and then you're just manipulating training load. So training load is not only just weight on the bar, but the reps that you use, so volume that you're doing, and then the proximity to failure. And all of these, it's like a 10 band or whatever equalizer, and you get to kind of try to optimize. That's effectively the formulation of the training. And so if somebody had too low of a training load, then I would likely increase volume, because I suspect that I was starting from a place that was intelligent, like the exercise selection was appropriate to what you care about. The rep scheme was also appropriate, and intensity was appropriate to what you care about, if maximal strength, hypertrophy, whatever. And then the proximity to failure was also intelligent. Like you weren't doing every set to RP 10, for example, for maximal strength. So those are some big assumptions. But look, if you're a Barbell Medicine Plus subscriber, I feel like it's a reasonable assumption nonetheless. If it's too much training load, then I'm going to go the opposite way. I'm likely going to reduce the number of sets, increase the proximity to failure, so get further away from failure, things of that nature. And, that's kind of like the 10,000 foot view. There's some nuance here, though. So, for example, what if the environment is just not conducive to you making gains, meaning you're missing meals, or, for example, your sleep is compromised, life stress, whatever? If that's the case, training modification probably should still happen, but also your expectations should change, just a different season of life. And so I think about when I was in the ICU, for example, doing that rotation. I think about, when you were doing night shifts, for example, in medical school, it's just not a great environment. And so you're like, look, this is more like maintenance mode. Like I'm training for a psychological benefit, and then also to like maintain my existing adaptations. At that point, almost universally, I like reducing training load, just because it's not the training stress that's pickling you or cooking you, it's the life stress. And so reducing the training load to sort of match all of that seems like a good idea. We see this like people in high stress academic settings, like, I got finals coming up, or high stress job settings. Look, I got deadline, I got whatever. Does that kind of make sense to you?
Yeah, you're mitigating detraining as much as possible, compared with the idea of promoting, new training adaptations. And by mitigating detraining, it makes it so that when you're ready to kind of put all your resources back in the game, you're less likely to experience either significant soreness that takes a ton of time to recover from, or an injury that would be, otherwise avoidable because you didn't have as big of a jump in your training loads compared to if you just like quit or taken time off altogether. So it's just kind of keeping you as prepared as possible to get back in the game once you're ready.
Yeah. And then the last little wrinkle here is, let's say maybe the training load's actually fine. And again, the training formulation, what the training consists of, is also reasonable or fine to the best of your knowledge. Maybe it's a technique related thing. So for example, your legs may in fact be getting stronger on a squat, but if your technique is compromised to such a point where it's a ceiling right now, well, you got to work on that. And it could be, broadly speaking, I separate these into like two different categories. Is this just like a skill related thing, or is like a specific muscle deficiency that you need to kind of like make up for? And so I discuss this a lot in the low fatigue ebook, whatever. So that would be a great resource for not only like troubleshooting, but also like how to identify those sticking points. But yeah, that'd be kind of like the last little wrinkle here. It's like, well, maybe the training load is fine. Maybe the environment is also fine. Maybe it's just you. Like it's not me, it's you. that sort of thing. And so we discussed the courses of action there. So that kind of all makes sense. And you're just going to monitor your response and iteratively change based on the same sort of like little algorithm we just worked through. The last question here was, is there a time where powerlifters will benefit from just a straight up hypertrophy block to break a plateau? Generally speaking, outside of psychological preferences where someone's like, look, I do not want to do the low bar squat, the competition bench, my regular deadlift, I'm just burnt out. Outside of that setting, which is totally fine, totally normal, and like whatever, you can do a break. Not really. I don't think that powerlifters should be doing hypertrophy specific sort of training to the exclusion of training for their sport. Mainly because you get a decent hypertrophy stimulus from squat, bench, deadlift, and their variations. You can prioritize hypertrophy more in a particular block if you feel like my technique is compromised by lack of musculature. And ultimately, like long-term strength gain requires both hardware updates, that's hypertrophy at the level of the muscle, more functional units to create force at the level of the muscle, and software updates, that neurological type stuff. And you want both. So a good program should include elements of both, and where you shift your priority, hypertrophy versus strength, and that blend kind of depends on the individual and then also where they're at in the competitive year. If you're close to a meet, probably not a lot of hypertrophy work. If you're far away from a meet, more hypertrophy work, generally speaking. Does that make sense to you?
I think it's reasonable if you don't know anything else about the person. And the reason I make that caveat is that I think that over time, working with enough people, we have also seen some folks who just generally tend to do better with more of their training spent in higher rep ranges.
Totally.
And they prefer it. They train better that way. They tolerate it better. And it still ends up leading to like 1RM performance improvements and things like that, like keeping reps higher for longer. And then other people who just tell us reliably, they're like, gosh, every time I do higher rep sets at a particular, say, reasonable intensity range, maybe they don't respond as well or things tend to decline. And so this is all just where, you're proposing, like, knowing nothing else about you, here's how I would go about this. But once you gather more information about the person's kind of training response or their preferences or things like that, then it just becomes an exercise in tailoring it towards those things, even though you don't necessarily need to commit to that forever. So even when I tailor something towards it, I still might say, hey, what do you think about experimenting with this for a little bit of time if it's something you never tried before? Even that is sometimes enough to get somebody excited and try hard, which is all that might be needed for them, and something new.
Yeah, get excited about their training for sure. The last little nugget here, and then we can move on. I don't want to do 20-minute answers to every question.
Agree.
I find that the people who tend to thrive upon switching to higher rep ranges, present company, me included, I'm talking about me, it mostly stems from like overshooting on the lower rep ranges. Meaning,
because you like the bigger weights.
Yeah, who doesn't?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, look, if I have a little bit of like, maybe we'll call it like a conditioning level constraint, like, look, dude, what are you going to squat for a set of 8, for a set of 10? What are you going to deadlift for a set of 12?
Show me.
That's what I'm saying. So I can't, I can't go full send because I'm like, I'm gonna get tired.
Yeah.
So just a thought. I don't have any evidence to support that. It's just completely made up, but some experience there. All right, I hope that helps clear up some of the confusion about defining a stall, and it gets you thinking about ways to address it. Like we mentioned, strength isn't linear, and sometimes the best move is to actually stay the course. However, if you've checked the boxes and you truly are stuck, you're going to need a plan. So we just released this brand new exclusive 6-part audio series on Barbell Medicine Plus called the Training Plateau Action Plan, and we go into every variable: training volume, intensity, frequency, exercise selection, progression, and more. And we give you a step-by-step guide to help diagnose and try to troubleshoot your own training. You can sign up and get instant access to the series, the PDF, and our entire library of exclusive content at barbellmedicine.supercast.com. Check it out now.